Hello from COP27 here in Egypt, a country that knows very well what it's like to be on the front line of climate change. To talk about what's been going on here at COP and what the EIB is doing about it, I'm very happy to be joined by Nancy Saich, who is the EIB's Chief Climate Change Expert, and Eila Kreivi, who is the EIB's Chief Sustainable Finance Advisor. Thanks both of you for joining. Nancy, let me ask you first of all, it's all about climate finance, it's all about ratcheting up the numbers, but are we in danger of missing a trick about the other stuff as well?
Yes, I do think that obviously climate finance is a huge focus here, and that's true at the EIB as well. We have our exceeding 50% target for climate finance, but there's two other angles that are really important. One is this is also a COP where there's a lot of discussion about nature, and it's important to remember that the green finance angle, which is climate finance plus environmental finance. And at the bank, we have now this target for climate action and environmental sustainability. So that's the first thing, bringing in biodiversity and nature, water, etc. But the second thing is this really important aspect of aligning all finance flows with the Paris Agreement, even if they're not for climate, even if they're for health, education. It's really important that all finance flows are Paris aligned. They don't all have to be climate finance, but they all have to be Paris aligned.
So what does that mean in practice, Eila? I mean, I guess that covers an area that we call transition. It's a word that we're hearing a lot in COP, but there is a worry, isn't there, that transition, as President Hoyer of the EIB said, can become an excuse for in perpetuity.
Indeed, and that is a very grave danger. First of all, I think what we see is that when people talk about climate finance, they talk about what they do in the green and climate space. But at the same time, they continue financing the fossil, the brown, the soon-to-be stranded assets as well. And this is something that we need to stop. At the very minimum, you need to stop doing harm, even if you are not doing good. So that is the first thing. And transition, indeed, it can be used as a little bit as a smokescreen. I have seen cases where oil companies are saying that they drill oil powered by solar panels, and that should count as transition. That of course doesn't, because anything that locks in that fossil for another 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years is of course not transition. That is locking in the brown one, which we should not be doing. So we should keep the two really apart. And I think we, at some stage fairly soon, we also need some definitions in terms of what is actual transition and what is not.
Tell us a bit more about why, Nancy, first of all. You've both worked very closely on this whole area of defining what is green, what is not green. Why does it matter, and particularly in the area we're talking about?
Yes, well, if we look at, for example, the EU taxonomy, which is a green taxonomy that we've been working on and which we have adopted, and we're doing that progressively, it includes some transition activities. There are some green activities that are part of a transition, a green transition, where you don't yet, for example, have a low carbon solution. Energy efficiency, for example, is still a transition. But what we're talking about now is this wider transition across the whole economy. And Eila's right, we have to be really honest. There are some things that can't transition, that need to be in a managed way stopped and closed down. But there are also activities that can transition, but are spending quite a lot of efforts to slow that down. And we need to be aware of that, and we need to be asking questions of our clients as a public bank and encouraging our other clients to do that, so as to make sure that this urgent change is happening away from significant harm, away from lock-in, and away from things which frankly are undermining the Paris goals.
I mean, this sounds in some ways quite technical, but fundamentally it is, isn't it, Eila, about giving confidence to the markets, giving transparency to the investors, isn't it, as well?
It is exactly that, because right now, for example, in the financial markets, the debt markets, we have seen that, for example, the term transition has been a little bit somehow tarnished. There was a couple of years ago attempt to do plenty, which was called transition finance, but then what was actually done was so different and so varying that people kind of got very shy to touch the whole label. And right now, what I'm hearing, for example, from bankers, investors, they don't want to talk about transition because it can be about anything and everything. So we do not need those definitions. We do need definitions what is significant harm and then what is getting out of the significant harm into the territory which we can live with, which is what we call amber transition, which happens to be the color of Nancy's shirt today.
Amber transition.
So to what extent is this all then going to help support the outcome that we so desperately need, which of course, as we're hearing here at this COP, is so urgent?
Well, I think it does, as long as we're honest about how close to the edge of the climate crisis we are. The UN Secretary General has described it as potentially a suicide pact if humanity does not step back from the brink. And he's not talking about in 2050, he's talking about now. And so we have to be really honest about not investing and supporting companies to move away from the activities in energy and transport that are causing the problem. We can't wrap them up and call them transition solutions when they're driving us over the edge. So we need indeed to be really, really focused on action right now and decarbonisation of all sectors.
So just briefly, what do you want to see coming out of this COP?
Okay, well, that's a rather different question for me. For me, what I want to see coming out of this COP is a serious addressing of the issue of the poorest countries that are being hard hit by climate change impacts, that are still not actually getting the support that they need to have climate projects, but also to adapt and to have a future where we can actually see those people not being left behind. We say those words all the time, leave no one behind, but right now those countries are being left behind, and I'm really hoping that there will be a stepping up by developed countries to help them.
Eila?
I would also underline the need of attention on adaptation. And if you want to know what we are talking about when we say adaptation, go and see the Pakistani pavilion. It will make you weep.
Thank you so much on that note. Thank you, Nancy Saich and Eila Kreivi. And that's all from us for the moment from COP.